The hallway air still held that scent of past winters, of sealed files and dust layered over long drawers of evidence. When I stepped into the room, the scene flashed back with precise quiet. The soft outline of yellowing tape on floor tile, the old camera tripod left in storage, and the sensation that time had not moved since that late autumn in 1985. It was not dramatic, not loud, not even memorable to anyone except those who stood here then. Yet the atmosphere remained intact, as if the particles of light themselves remembered. A woman lay in that memory, still as photographs, still as unprocessed thought. Aurora Merrill, age 27, a journalism graduate with steady eyes and an apartment full of books. The case report said she lived alone, rarely traveled, and wrote brief community features for the city paper, mostly neighborhood interviews and civic updates. She had no scandals, no headline ambitions. Just a name and a quiet life. That is why the stillness feels heavier than expected. I returned today for the reopening, though the word reopening felt too active. This scene was not opening, not stirring, not awakening. It was simply being observed again with more calm than before. The gloves I wore made no sound. The lights above hummed with a soft current. The technician who granted access signed the log and left without speaking. It was better this way. Silence fit this moment. I began with the folder labeled AM1985, thin but not underdeveloped. Photos, initial canvassing notes, neighbor statements, phone logs with actual handwriting. The paper smelled of attic air, time-stored fabric, and old adhesive. I turned each page deliberately. No rush. Aurora's life did not require urgency, it required accuracy. A single photograph drew me in. She stood on her balcony in late summer sunlight, wearing a soft green cardigan, laughing at someone behind the lens. There was no exact time stamp, but the color fading suggested long exposure to drawer light. The balcony fence, metal with peeling paint, curved slightly inward. That detail became relevant later. For now, it was simply part of the scene, like the potted rosemary arranged near her elbow. Aurora grew small things. That was noted in her interviews. Herbs, succulents, lavender by the kitchen window. That quiet cultivation suggested patience, someone who planned even the smallest detail of her daily rhythm. In December of that same year, on a night that carried rain and freezing air, she was found inside her apartment. No forced entry, no sign of struggle recorded. She appeared resting, almost composed. The official statement from the time designated the passing as unresolved. Unresolved is a neutral word, but it holds weight. I looked up from the file. The room around me was pale, washed in fluorescent tone. The narrow windows let in nothing but muted city sound. A cart sat beside the shelves with reels of tape stored in clear cases. That was my next step. The tape machine clicked twice before it accepted the reel. No voices at first, only static. Then the soft tone of the original field interview. A neighbor, Mrs. Lang, age 62. Her voice was polite, hesitant. She said Aurora often received deliveries, books mostly, and occasionally letters. She never mentioned visitors. She described Aurora as disciplined, early to rise, punctual in her walks to the bus stop. But one detail, spoken gently, caught the edge of my thoughts. On the week before Aurora's passing, she received a package without a return label. Mrs. Lang noticed because Aurora commented on it in passing, even joked that it was a surprise without a sender. That phrase repeated itself in my memory, echoing through the reels, though she only said it once. I paused the tape, rewound 5 seconds, played it again. Same softness, same wording, a surprise without a sender. It was procedural to note it, but at the time it had not pointed in any clear direction. Now, decades later, that line aligned with the new evidence flagged by the lab. Adhesive residue on the flap of a box, catalogued but never examined beyond surface analysis. Lab technology in 1985 lacked the precision of current methods, so I requested the item from secure storage. The technician returned after a quiet knock. He placed the sealed container on the table. No words, just the click of the lock opening, the release of a memory not fully understood when stored. The box within was ordinary brown cardstock, edges softened. No markings except a single black pen line crossing the top flap. The adhesive, faintly glossy, held a trace of a compound that modern scanners could differentiate. I lifted the lid with cautious respect, as if handling an old letter from a friend rather than evidence. Inside lay nothing except a folded note. The ink was pale blue, handwriting neat, minimal. It read in evenly spaced lines. To Aurora for your work. To the quiet hours you keep. To the stories you collect. No name, no date, no signature, no threat, nothing loud or dramatic. A calm acknowledgement of her schedule, her craft, her identity, almost appreciative. That was what unsettled me most, the tone of affirmation rather than disturbance. I shifted in my chair. The sound of fabric against metal echoed too sharply. I waited for the room to soften again. A fingerprint analysis in current conditions revealed something small, oil patterns consistent with printer ink residue. That is, not the ink of handwriting but ink of commercial printing devices. The note appeared handwritten, but whoever handled it carried microscopic traces of machine ink on their skin. Not damning, just precise. And precision builds direction. I reviewed the phone logs next. Aurora made 4 calls in the week preceding her passing. One to her editor, one to her sister in Tacoma, one to a bookstore special order desk, and one to a number not included in records for caller identity. The note on that line, written in pencil by the officer recording the log, simply said, brief, polite, ended quickly. No transcription, no recording. It was then I noticed a slip of paper tucked behind the call sheet. A business card, edges crisp despite the years. The name, S. Holbrook. Title, City Records Liaison. Nothing remarkable, until I checked the personnel list attached to the 1985 Municipal Office Directory. That same liaison had transferred departments in late October, just weeks before Aurora's final days. And the forwarding address listed for that role matched the neighborhood of Aurora's balcony view. Not close enough to be suspicious by itself, but close enough to be noticed. I remembered her photo again, Aurora laughing, balcony railing curved. The air around that memory carried light dust motes suspended in sun. She looked content, unaware of the quiet puzzle forming around her life. I found a field note in the folder almost overlooked, a brief interview with Holbrook conducted months after the case. His responses were short, courteous. He said he had met Aurora once in a public archive room discussing neighborhood election statistics. He claimed no ongoing communication, no meetings beyond that single exchange. It was all straightforward. But there was a detail in his statement. He referenced her article on local library restoration efforts. Minor, almost insignificant, except Aurora never published that piece. It remained in her notes, incomplete drafts found on her desk. She had mentioned to her editor that it needed one more source to feel balanced. That suggests Holbrook saw the draft, and if he saw the draft, he was in her apartment or in possession of her file copies. I leaned back. The room dimmed in my perception. The faint hum of the tape machine was steady, like breathing. Holbrook's personnel file indicated he left the city entirely in 1986. Quiet relocation, no recorded reasons. The family of Aurora had always wondered if someone in her professional sphere held answers, but they never pressed. Their conversations with me years later remained composed, polite, grateful for renewed attention but careful not to demand closure. I thought of the phrase on the note again, to the quiet hours you keep, a recognition of routine. Someone observed her schedule closely enough to mirror it in writing. Routine becomes map, and map becomes direction. I shifted to her day planner, preserved with gentle handling. The final week had 3 entries: pick up developed film, return borrowed census ledger, and call SH Wednesday. That was written in shorthand but unmistakable. SH could be anyone, of course, but the proximity to Holbrook's initials was impossible to ignore. Not dramatic, simply logical. The snow outside the evidence windows intensified, softening the city view. The cold air thickened. I stood and walked toward the balcony photo pinned to the file board. Aurora's laugh in that captured moment seemed less carefree now. Not sad, not fearful, just unaware of the quiet attention gathering around her. My return to this case was not driven by regret or urgency, but by the precision of unexamined fragments. The twist was not a reveal but a line connecting slowly, patiently. Holbrook's access to draft files, his relocation without comment, the unsigned note with familiarity threaded through its wording, each detail, quiet and deliberate. I sat again, noting each item with controlled clarity. Justice, if it came, would be procedural, written in forms, stamped, filed, confirmed. But something beyond the paperwork remained unsettled. The echo of her balcony laughter, the rosemary pot she tended, the soft cardigan she wore in late summer sun. Time did not heal this room, it preserved it, and preservation is its own kind of memory. The corridor outside the evidence room stretched in a long, unbroken line, faint overhead lights marking the passage of hours that no one counted anymore. When I stepped back inside, the container remained exactly where I left it, the note still resting with a kind of composed silence. Nothing in this case raised its voice. Everything spoke in understatement. I turned to the secondary archive, where personal effects were stored in climate-regulated drawers. Aurora's belongings had been catalogued with steady handwriting by the original investigator, a man known for meticulous record-keeping. The drawers slid open with a muted glide. Inside, a small collection of items: keys, library card, bus pass, notebook, and a slim audio cassette labeled in her handwriting, "Interview. R. Keene, Community Election Data." It was dated 2 months before her final winter week. The cassette clicked into the machine. Soft ambience at first, shuffling papers, a chair being adjusted. Aurora's voice emerged, calm, thoughtful, careful, with pauses. "I appreciate your time," she said, the words evenly spaced. The respondent, Keene, answered with quiet courtesy. Their conversation held no evident tension. They discussed voting patterns, community involvement, library hours. Nothing sharp, nothing startling. But midway through, Keene mentioned an intermediary. "You'll want to speak with the liaison assigned last cycle. He keeps everything in order. Holbrook. He answers after 3 most days." The name fell into place, not heavy, just aligned. Aurora thanked him, the interview concluded, and the tape ended with soft room tone. That tone lingered longer than expected, a kind of breath before silence fully settled. I rewound the tape, stopped before the final seconds. Something in Keene's tone implied familiarity, not just with Holbrook but with the structured path of Aurora's research. I checked the notes attached to the tape. In her own handwriting, H equals detail-oriented, helpful but guarded. Follow up carefully. She had circled the last 2 words, carefully. That word was her approach to everything. She wrote with care, organized with care, lived with care. The note in the package echoed that aspect, recognizing her rhythm rather than intruding upon it. I opened her notebook next. It held clipped article drafts, grocery lists, scattered lines of observation about street improvements and library renovations. One entry stood out, not for content but for neatness. Interview notes. SH schedule irregular, prefers late hours. Quiet voice precise. The ink pressure was lighter than her normal writing, as if she had written it while thinking too much, holding her breath. I looked again at the item list. A second notebook had not been catalogued, or rather, had been catalogued and set aside as unrelated personal journaling. I requested it from the storage desk. When it arrived, the tape seal showed original year of intake ink untouched. I opened it slowly. The notebook differed from her others, fewer community notes, more reflection, though still restrained. Aurora was not confessional. Her entries were observational even when personal. One page dated early November simply read, "Interview pending with SH interest in access protocols. May require second verification." Interest in access protocols. That phrasing suggested procedure, not personal early connection. Something about the way she wrote it implied she had become aware of his role extending beyond paperwork. The page after held a different kind of entry, received envelope with no sender designation. Content pleasant, tone composed, unsure of intention, keep for record. She logged it like evidence, not like a card. She understood documentation. The envelope she described matched the package. The tone matched the folded message. If there had been multiple correspondences, the logs of deliveries might show it. I moved to the old mail ledger section. Her building kept manual entries back then, signing in any posted items left at the front desk. In the week before that winter, her name appeared twice. The first entry matched the package date. The second, 3 days later, had no tracking number. Just a time stamp 4:12 p.m. and initials indicating pickup. The initials were not hers. Not Aurora's, not the clerk's. Different handwriting style, angular, sharp strokes. If someone collected her mail for her, it would have been noted. If a clerk signed, the standard style would appear. This hand was unfamiliar. I copied the initials exactly into my notes, tracing their angle, SH. Not proof, not loud, not dramatic, just aligned. I closed the ledger and let the quiet settle again. Silence is not absence in a case like this. It is presence without movement. Next, I returned to the personnel directories. Holbrook's transfer paperwork included a forwarding address, but also a signature verifying the transition. Signatures often reveal consistency. I placed the forwarding paperwork beside the mail ledger copy. Same angle, same downward tilt, same abbreviated curve beneath the final stroke. Not identical, but undeniably related. I recorded this, not as conclusive but as connective. Near the bottom of his file rested a reference letter he once submitted for municipal reassignment. It described him as reserved, procedural, capable of sensitive archive handling. Reserved appeared twice. The repetition made it stand out. I thought again of Aurora's balcony image, her relaxed posture, her lighter expression. Those moments likely existed far apart from her investigative work, yet the circles of her professional path intersected, calmly, with Holbrook. I shifted to another archived reel, this one logged months after Aurora's passing. It contained a follow-up interview with the building attendant. His tone was respectful. "She was always timely," he said. When asked about visitors, he paused. Long, quiet pause. Only once, a man, soft voice, polite, didn't stay long. The interviewer asked if he remembered the date. He did not, but remembered the coat. A gray wool with smooth lapels. A detail without implication, simply texture. Yet it matched Holbrook's personnel photo from the same period, formal wool coat, understated. I rewound and replayed the word polite. Spoken by the attendant by Keene, implied by Aurora's own notes. A consistency of tone, not character judgment. I removed the last item from the drawer. a developed film strip labeled Community Library Interior, Sunset Light. Most frames captured ordinary shelves, dust and sun, chairs angled near reading lamps. But in the final frame, Aurora had turned the lens slightly, catching the far end of the archive desk. A stack of folders, a coffee cup, and a blurred figure leaning to one side, half out of frame. The silhouette was not sharp enough to define features, but the posture, the tilt of shoulder, resembled Holbrook's personnel ID image. The exact slight lean of someone accustomed to reading on high counters under desk lamps. This was not revelation, only accumulation. That is how cases like this move, not with spectacle but with sequence. I stepped back from the board and let the fragments arrange themselves. They did not snap into place, they settled. Aurora's life, her routines, her cautious method of interviewing, her careful notes, they were observed by someone within an administrative network she accessed for research. Not intrusively but attentively. Her schedule became familiar. Her drafts became known. Her presence in the archival rooms became expected. I revisited the note for the third time that day. To the quiet hours you keep. Not sentiment, not admiration, recognition. Recognition implies awareness, and awareness implies contact beyond official lines. When the updated analysis report came from the lab, it contained an itemized list: adhesive markers, fiber traces, ink compounds. Among them, a microscopic strand of wool consistent with formal overcoat textile, neutral in itself, but consistent with the garment described, photographed, and archived. Again, not loud, only aligned. The case moved forward on that alignment, carried by routine rather than impulse. The eventual procedural outcome, the one recorded decades later, was written in neutral language. Confirmation of contact, confirmation of access, confirmation of presence during documented intervals. The family received closure in a structured manner, with gentle explanation. But here in the evidence room, the narrative still breathed differently. I sat one last time before the balcony photograph, letting the light from the cold hallway fall across her image. Aurora did not appear troubled, did not seem aware of observation. Her life was arranged in modest order: writing, small plants, bus schedules, recorded interviews. The world around her included others who kept similar hours, who worked in quiet offices, who handled documents and researched the way she handled stories. A parallel rhythm, intersecting without sound. The official record would present the conclusion in measured terms. It would not describe the rosemary pot she watered every morning, or the ink pressure of her notebook entries, or the softness of her laughter caught by a fatting camera. It would not mention the autumn air or the dust in the evidence room. It would simply state contact verified, timeline established, responsibilities assigned. Justice in procedural form often feels like a stamp against paper, present but without human texture. Yet texture remains, even if unrecorded. I closed the folder slowly. The air returned to stillness. Aurora's presence remained, not in mystery but in detail, lived hours, quiet notes, steady documentation. The room held its breath again, not for suspense but for memory. The building exterior carried the same muted brick tone it held in the archived photographs, unchanged by decades of weather and seasonal light. I stood across the street long enough to register the absence of movement, the stillness of windows that had once framed Aurora's daily routines. The corner bakery had changed ownership twice. The bus stop pole was replaced with a newer design, yet the upper floors remained familiar, not in color or structure but in quiet. The municipal records office confirmed the final progression of events with neutral precision. Interviews conducted, documents cross-referenced, signatures compared, schedule logs aligned. Nothing speculative, nothing abrupt. Steady increments of verification. A conclusion formed not through assumption but repetition. Holbrook's eventual statement, given in controlled conditions, was brief, courteous. He acknowledged archival interaction, routine exchange of information, occasional after-hours contact regarding access procedures. His words were composed, steady, measured. No exaggeration, no avoidance, simply outlined recollection. He described Aurora as diligent, thoughtful, and consistently respectful of document integrity. When asked about the messages, his response held a thoughtful pause before soft clarification. A gesture of thanks, he said, for her commitment to structured reporting. He believed she would appreciate acknowledgement of her quiet discipline, her reliable habits, her care for detail. It was not written as sentiment, more as recognition of a parallel craft. The review board accepted the explanation with due consideration. Procedure followed, forms signed, timelines completed. The narrative found official shape in orderly language, unembellished. Still, I returned to the evidence room to complete the final inventory. The balcony photograph remained pinned under archival light. I studied it again with the awareness of resolution. Aurora's expression in sun, her posture relaxed, the soft cardigan sleeve folded near her wrist. None of it hinted at the network of documentation and cross-reference that would later define her file. I took the notebook containing her personal entries and turned to the page before her reference to careful follow-up. It held a simple observation. The city holds stories in its shelves, not loud ones, not urgent ones, just steady record. Her writing, even in personal reflection, maintained that calm balance between presence and restraint. The updated fiber report, now fully logged, confirmed textile consistency with the garment described in her building attendance statement. The writing analysis affirmed alignment between the ledger initials and the relocation signature. The note, though still unsigned, no longer floated without context. It belonged to a sequence, not an incident. I sealed the box one final time. The adhesive tabs closed with a soft click, almost inaudible. The container would be placed not in active rotation, but in the resolved archive wing, cataloged with clarity rather than uncertainty. Outside, evening approached with a pale gradient over the skyline. The air held a calm chill, not sharp, simply present. I walked back to the location where Aurora had once waited for her morning bus, where her day began with predictable steadiness. Routine is often overlooked, but here it formed the entire framework of understanding. The bookstore where she placed her last special order still existed, though in a smaller form. I stepped inside and recognized nothing specific, yet sensed an atmosphere she might have appreciated. Quiet shelves, softened light, gentle arrangement of titles. The clerk, unaware of history, arranged a stack of journals with deliberate care. That small gesture echoed her own patterns, measured, attentive, unhurried. I opened her final notes once more. The handwriting remained consistent, each letter formed with respectful pressure. Her draft on library restoration, though incomplete, conveyed patience. She described reading spaces, evening lamp glow, children's corners with soft chairs, catalog drawers sliding in practiced rhythm. She wrote as if preservation itself carried narrative value. Holbrook, in his brief explanatory acknowledgement, referenced the same spaces. He spoke with calm regard for archival rooms, filing systems, decayed paper edges that require gentle handling. Their work intersected in quiet labor, neither dramatic nor disruptive. That intersection, defined by mutual precision, became the axis of understanding. I sat on a bench across from her former building, letting dusk finalize its tone. The streetlights activated one by one, their illumination soft rather than stark. The air moved lightly across pavement, carrying no urgency. A bicycle passed, steady and balanced, the rider focused forward. The apartment windows above reflected nothing distinct, only the pale sky. I imagined her watering the rosemary pot as she did each morning, adjusting soil with attentive fingers, noting leaf texture and scent. That daily act, unremarkable on its surface, defined her approach to everything, care calibrated through repetition. In the official report, the term closure appeared once, placed with formal restraint. Yet closure in administrative context differs from closure in lived memory. The forms conclude. The narrative remains. I walked the hallway of the evidence facility one last time before sign-out. The overhead hum accompanied my steps, even and low. In the reflection of the observation window, the case board appeared complete. Photographs aligned, documents sealed, audio reels cataloged. Nothing unsorted. Still, the room held a trace of presence beyond inventory. Not in unfinished questions, but in the quiet acknowledgement that her steady work, her balanced voice, her measured observations were understood at last not as fragments, but as a whole rhythm. When I closed the logbook, the pen left a final clear line. Outside, the city transitioned fully into evening calm. The past no longer pressed against the present. It sat alongside it with composed stillness. Aurora's file would rest among resolved cases, but her imprint, quiet and exact, remained in the softened corners of routine. In archival dust, in lined paper, in balcony sun, in the understated recognition of professional craft. Justice, in its structured form, fulfilled its obligation. Yet something more enduring persisted, that quiet, human cadence beyond documentation. As I stepped into the night air, the city lights reflected on the old brick surfaces, steady and unbroken. Not triumphant, not mournful, simply continuous. There in that ongoing rhythm, Aurora's hours remained methodical, observant, intact.